Welcome to all learners. A classroom consists of the living things. We know that the living things are the students, the teachers, and hence how to deal with them, how to make the teaching learning process more interesting. So this is a main task that a teacher faces in classroom. In today's discussion, we are going to deal with metacognitive strategies in teaching learning process. Let us start with the strategies. Before going to the strategies, in this session, the focus will be upon to explain the meaning of metacognitive strategies, to identify the various strategies that can be used to develop metacognitive thinking. Generally, in a classroom, as a teacher, when we look, we know that we are concentrating more on cognitive strategies. What is the importance of this metacognition? So, when we look at the term cognition and metacognition, we know that cognition deals with one's own thinking, and then metacognition, we know that thinking about one's own thinking. Let's take a case of a classroom situation, and generally what type of activities or general strategies that a teacher put or conduct to learners. That may be the routine test instead of the non-routine problems in test. The teachers are more comfortable in giving the routine problems in classroom. What is this problem denotes is that the routine problems, for example, in mathematics, suppose you are giving a multiplication problem to a learner. That is a routine problem where there involves only direct problem solving ability. Whereas take the case of non-routine problems, when we put a situation for the learners telling that suppose an individual has taken or they have taken 3 pieces of paper or any object from the group, he has got the remaining this one. And then when he added this one, he has got this much. So such type of situation, if we give, there the learner has to think to and fro, and critical thinking skills should also be developed. So generally the problem solving activities can be divided into two: the routine problems in test and the non-routine problems in test. Let us go through the psychologist Wertheimer, who is known as one of the propounders of Gestalt psychology. He stated about the importance of problem solving. He provides a Gestalt interpretation of problem solving episodes of children presented with mathematical problems. Generally, the routine problems in test and the non-routine problems in test, it can be added more in mathematics classroom. And here, the essence of successful problem solving behavior, according to Wertheimer, is being able to see the overall structure of a problem. Then we can state it as the holistic perspective or the holistic picture. What the structure of the whole require for the parts. And here comes the psychological background of these metacognitive strategies. That we have to see a problem in its holistic perspective. And we know that in NEP 2020 also the holistic situation is giving more importance. And regarding this Gestalt psychology, where they emphasize that the whole is more important than the parts. And based on this, it can be stated that this Gestalt, it denotes a configuration and gives emphasis for the holistic perspective. Now, this Gestalt psychologists, they are stating that there are other psychologists also, Wolfgang Goethe and Kohler. All these psychologists belongs to this Gestalt psychologist, and they stated about some of the principles. Before discussing the principles, let us see what problem-solving process was prescribed by Wertheimer. Number 1, the learner should be encouraged to discover the underlying nature of a problem. Number 2, gaps are an important stimulus for learning. And number 3, instruction should be based upon the law of organization. Let us see the details that what the learner has to do in a classroom situation while engaging in teaching learning process. Whatever be the topic, whether it be the humanities, science or anything, we can see that a problem, when it comes in front of the learner has to identify what type of problem is coming. It's not like the behavioral issue, it is a conceptual clarity may be there, or some kind of deep thinking is needed there. So that is important in the nature of a problem. And secondly, when we think that, we can see when a situation comes or a problem solving situation is in front of the learners. Earlier also, they may have acquainted with some kind of problem solving abilities. But here comes the importance of the gaps. From the gaps, the new problem solving ability can be developed. And last point what they are giving is that the teaching learning process, when a teacher did it in a classroom, the teacher has to incorporate the principles of law of organization. Here comes the next question, what are the laws of organization? There, the laws of organization can be categorized into 4, like the law of proximity, the law of closure, the law of similarity, the law of simplicity. Let us go through each law in little bit detail, that what do we mean by the law of proximity. The proximity, the term itself denotes that nearness. So the objects that are close to each other are grouped together. So what is this law states that the objects, suppose we have seen some kind of designs where it is divided into different columns, and the figures of each column may be different. Some may have circles, some may have squares, some may have pyramids. How do we see? We perceive, instead of holistic, we perceive it in parts based on the law of proximity. So the nearness of the object has given some kind of idea in the mind of the observer. So the objects that are close to each other are grouped together. That is the first law. The second law stated that the law of closure, that it perceives incomplete object or shapes as a whole. Suppose we can see the circle which have some kind of broken lines in the midst, but we stated that it is a circle. We won't state that it consists of different lines, broken lines. We won't state it like that. That is the law of closure. The next one, the law of similarity. So this law stated that items that are similar are grouped together. Suppose we can see on a table there are some fruits may be kept, or at the same time some papers, some stationery items. So we cluster it on the basis of the similar objects. That is the law of similarity. Coming to the last law, we can see that the law of simplicity, where it stated that reality should be reduced to the simplest form. So these kinds of laws of organization is important while a teacher plan the teaching learning process while taking lessons in classroom. Then the implication, the instructional implication of the skill-based, that is especially the problem-based view, is that students should learn basic problem-solving skills, not in isolation. And it consists of different problem-solving component skills also, which is enough to promote non-routine problem-solving. So we cannot think that this problem-solving skill doesn't have any components. It has many components, that planning it has to take, then what are the nature of the things, then how to deal, what strategy has to use. All these things should be kept in mind. As I stated that in a normal classroom situation, the teacher may be giving the cognitive strategies, then the affective strategies. So this in cognitive strategies, generally what is important, that is the imagery, the visual thing, the reasoning, the deduction, everything will be there. And in the affective, that we may think about that their interest, how it is favorable for the learner, all these things. Do we use metacognitive strategies in classroom? Which is an important component where the learner has the ability to introduce higher order thinking skills. And what is the difference between the routine test and the non-routine problem solving skills is that in the routine problem solving in test, there we can see the lower order thinking skills is needed. And after completing the next day, there is a directional process of the solving ability. Whereas in the case of the non-routine problem solving skills, the learner has to use higher order thinking skills, has to go to and fro. The learner has to use reasoning ability. The learner has to detect many things, frame some kind of assumptions. So such type of non-routine problem solving is very much helpful in classroom. In this context, I would like to describe about Gagney's conception of learning hierarchies. When we look at the screen, we can see that the learning hierarchies, it can be divided into the signal learning, stimulus response learning, chaining, learning verbal association, discrimination learning, concept learning, rule learning, and problem solving. So here, the concrete things, it is coming at the lower, and there we can see there are a lot of visual things that we can adopt it. And as we climb upon the ladder, we can see that the abstract concept, there comes the importance of problem solving. So many psychologists have given emphasis for the problem solving skill, where Gagney is emphasizing there is problem solving. Then comes the question that in the beginning what we have discussed, what is meaning, that is the inner language and thinking about one's own thinking. And third aspect, we can see that the self-awareness is an important part in metacognition. The learner has to know what the learner is doing. After doing a particular task, the learner has to think, how did I reach this task and what kind of things I have introduced. Then it allows people to take charge of cognition. What is the importance? The cognitive strategies are the basic mental abilities we use to think, study and learn. And metacognitive activities include planning how to approach a learning task using appropriate skills, monitoring one's own comprehension of text, self-assessment, evaluating progress towards the completion of a task. So we can see that there are cognitive as well as metacognitive. In cognitive, that is maybe the lower order thinking skills, and in metacognitive, hopes, that is the higher order thinking skills we are using. And then we have to plan, that is important, and monitor. And after monitoring, we have to evaluate the progress. How do we achieve? Suppose a mathematical problem solving is done. The learner has to think what strategy I have used to come to the answer. So there will be a backward thinking, a retrospective thinking, where the learner will identify where I got stuck. Instead of that problem solving strategy, I have to use another one. So there the inner talk is taking place in the mind of the learner, so that we call it as the inner language. Now again, when we look at the difference between cognition and metacognition, we can state that cognitive strategies, it helps a person process and manipulate information. But these metacognitive strategies, they have to be implemented, executed. And also they are known as self-regulatory strategies. Why it is known as? Because it is thinking about one's own thinking, and that thought process will lead to what wrong the learner did. So that next problem when it comes, the learner may not take that strategy. He may try another new strategy which makes the learner to arrive the answer in an easy way. And when we look at the elements of metacognition, what we can see is that it can be divided into two, that is metacognitive knowledge and metacognitive regulation. What do we mean by this metacognitive knowledge? What individuals know about themselves and cognitive process, that is known as metacognition. Whereas this metacognitive regulation, the adjustment individuals make to the processes to help control their learning. We are telling about the learner autonomy, the regulation of one's own learning process. Now it's happening. So that as distance education, IGNOU, the materials, they are emphasizing upon the learner autonomy. They have to adopt their own metacognitive strategies. Then next one, we can see that while going in this task, they have confronted with some things that metacognitive knowledge they have. What type of knowledge? The person variable is important, the task variable as well as the strategy variable. Regarding the person variable, the person has to think that am I adopting the correct strategy? So the person is thinking on its own. And regarding the task, the learner has a clear clarity about what to do about the question. Some questions the learner may not be getting what the learner has to do, what the learner has to solve. So that going to adopt the correct strategy or not. Now comes the importance. Why do we teach metacognitive skills? What is the importance? Then we can categorize it into three. That the first one, to improve learning process, and then for constructive understanding. We know that we are utilizing the psychological principle of constructivism, where the learner is considered as a co-creator of knowledge. So the constructive understanding should be there. And then by this metacognitive skills, the learner gain more confidence in learning and help to reflect one's own ideas. So all these things are important in the case of these metacognitive skills. Now the question may arise is, what tools I have to use in order to develop metacognitive skills in learners? There the two tools I'm going to introduce, that is learning logs and reflective journals. What do we mean by these learning logs? It consists of short objective entries, that observation of some science equipments or some field notes, questions about the lecture or reading list, the home assignments where it includes some innovative way of resolving the problem. And regarding the reflective journal, written in narrative form and are more subjective. So here the reflection of the learner. That's why in teacher education program we have incorporated the reflective journal. Whereas the learner has to think about their own journey from the beginning till the end. What are their expectations at the end, whether the expectations are met or not. So this learning logs and reflective diary is very much important. So this learning logs we can use as a formative assessment while in the teaching classroom. So what is included in using a reflective lesson log? We can see that it presents information, writings by students, sharing logs, it conducts brief discussion, sharing of ideas, summarization, net chunk of direct instruction, discussion in small groups, connect ideas to real groups. So some examples when we think of learning log, a learner to add his or her own ideas. So these methods of assessment will also change where it occurs: self-assessment, peer assessment, assessment using checklist and rubrics, assigning point values, level of thoughtfulness, personalization of students' responses to readings. So when we adopt these metacognitive strategies in classroom, we can feel that the assessment strategies are also changing along with the engagement of the learners. So in this session, we try to understand, to explain the meaning of metacognitive strategies and what are the different strategies that can be adopted and what are the advantages of using these metacognitive skills and how to assess these metacognitive learning experiences. As teachers in classroom, instead of adopting the cognitive strategies, let's try with the adoption of metacognitive strategies where it gives scopes for innovative ideas from the teacher as well as the learners. Thank you.